Okay, let's look at the Nike case study. This is obviously a very well-known and influential footwear company. Legendary founding. It was founded by University of Oregon track athlete Phil Knight and his coach Bill Bowerman in 1964. Bowerman made shoe sales out of his automobile at track meets. Okay, so what they found was that there's a problem with track shoes. Track shoes were always slipping, and so they devised this notion of spikes. Okay, but the early spikes were not like real pointy spikes. They actually made shoes with waffle irons. That's kind of a folksy founding. Okay, Knight and Bowerman devised the Nike name and trademark swoosh in 1971. This is one of the most iconic marketing symbols around the world. Very prestigious. Headquarters are still in Oregon. Here's the company's mission: to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Okay, there's a company with an athletics background that emphasizes athletics in its footwear. It's a multinational corporation, one of the world's largest suppliers of athletic shoes, apparel, and sports equipment. Nike has been very successful over the years. They have been successful for several reasons. They appeal to young shoppers who are more focused on health and wellness. Okay, and as I mentioned, their shoes are seen as very trendy. Now, they're all over the place here in the United States. Probably a bunch of us have Nike on right now, right? Is that right? Okay, several of us at least. Okay, so they're all over the United States, so they kind of lost their luxury brand appeal. It's kind of just sort of a shoe. But in other parts of the world, Nike is seen as like a trendy thing to wear. Their shoes are stylish and comfortable. Okay, so I like wearing Nike shoes. They're very, very comfortable. And this is a key driver of the company's success. Demand for athletic apparel is trending upwards globally. As prosperity comes to a lot of developing countries, there's increasing turn towards youth sports leagues and similar such things. Okay, this is a little bit hard to read down here at the bottom, but Nike's manufacturing map looks like this. Nike itself only employs, I think, less than 50,000 workers. However, Nike outsources their shoe manufacturing to affiliate companies that employ nearly 1 million workers. Okay, and their factories are around the world. So down here it says contract factories for Nike are over 600, workers are over 820,000, and manufacturing countries are 46. Okay, and primarily they are associated with manufacturing their shoes here in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, India. Okay, and Nike has become kind of a poster child for worker abuse, although they have cleaned up their act in recent years. Nike is famous for an innovative marketing strategy. Okay, their strategy relies on sponsorships. They pioneered the athletic sponsor, the celebrity athletic sponsor model. Okay, and that included using top athletes to use their products and promote and advertise technology and design. MJ was he kind of still is the iconic spokesperson for Nike. At one point, making I want to say $1.5 billion per year as a Nike spokesperson. That was at his height. I don't think he's making that now. Other Nike spokespersons include Serena Williams, Tiger Woods, who was in a car accident yesterday. I think Rory McIlroy is a Nike spokesperson. In the NBA, was Kevin Durant Nike? I think he's Nike. Harden's Adidas, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so they're different, and like HBU is Under Armour, so we're not Nike. But there are different kinds of shoe companies that now follow this model of the celebrity athlete sponsor. Okay, but Nike's the one that pioneered it. Okay, Nike is the brand of all NFL jerseys. They also sponsor countless U.S. colleges, although we've signed a deal here with Under Armour. Okay, they have expanded their presence in emerging markets such as China, India, and Brazil. These regions have had higher growth rates than developed markets for the past few years. Nike's kind of saturated America and other developed markets. Pretty much everybody who's going to buy Nike already buys Nike in those markets. And so most of their expansion opportunities are elsewhere. Like I said, they have under 50,000 employees themselves worldwide, although they contract with manufacturers that employ far more. Nike does have some weaknesses. They all rely almost exclusively on footwear sales. Their prices are relatively high compared to their competitors. This is because of their strong brand. They charge a premium on products, which in turn supports higher margins and profitability. This is a very profitable company, very profitable. But similar shoes can be found for much less if you buy an off-brand. As I mentioned, the cost of its footwear is higher than most of its competitors. This makes its product out of reach, sorry for the typo, for many customers around the globe, particularly in emerging markets. Now let's talk about Nike's ethical problems. As I mentioned, Nike is a poster child for bad treatment of suppliers. Here's just an inspection of one set of shoe plants in Vietnam that I looked up online. Notorious for unsafe conditions and underpaid workers. Plant workers in this particular set of, it's like a grouping of locations, have been found to be exposed to carcinogens, those are cancer-causing agents, that exceeded legal standards. These are Vietnamese legal standards, which are a lot looser than American legal standards. Exceeded legal standards by 177 times in parts of the plant. 77% of the plant's employees suffered from respiratory problems. That's an incredible statistic. 77, so 4 out of 5 plant employees are suffering from respiratory problems of some kind. Okay, plant employees are forced in this particular location to work 65 hours a week, more than Vietnamese law allows, in excessive heat, noise, and foul air for $10 a week. That's about 65 cents an hour. Workers with skin or breathing problems were not transferred to departments free of chemicals. More than half the workers who dealt with dangerous chemicals did not wear protective masks or gloves. Workers were not informed about these dangerous chemicals. Most of these workers are very uneducated laborers. They don't know how to unionize or how to agitate for better working conditions, and so they just kind of accept what is given to them. Okay, particular carcinogen was found in the air in the plant. Nike's also been busted over the years for employing underage workers, for instance, in Cambodia and Pakistan. They've always said that this was accidental. Now, Nike outsources its dirty work, so they themselves do not employ underage workers. This is, when I say it has employed, I mean their contracts companies are the ones employing the underage workers, which is how Nike can say things like this was accidental. Generally speaking, underage workers, single young women, other kinds of vulnerable laborers are the ideal workers for a supply chain that wants to maximize margins, because they're the ones who will work for the least amount and won't agitate for better working conditions. Men tend to get upset and aggressive. Women tend to be more passive in the developing world. They're not, schooled in feminism, and so don't have strong convictions about the importance of equal working conditions. Okay, over the past 20 years, Nike has improved conditions for its 1 million contract workers. So I should say on Nike's behalf, they have cleaned up their act, especially because of the bad publicity they've gotten over the years. Nike kind of became like the company par excellence that was just treating its workers like trash. Unfortunately, however, still many of its workers many of its factories in developing countries still do not meet Nike's own ethical standards. Nike has undertaken some improvements. Here, Phil Knight, the CEO's 6 policies for improving worker conditions in Nike supplier factories. All Nike shoe factories will meet U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration standards in indoor air quality. OSHA is the name of this agency. It's a worker protection agency in the United States. And Nike has pledged, at least, that they're going to be implementing this in all of their supplier factories. They have also pledged to raise the minimum age for their factory workers to 18 for footwear and 16 for apparel factories. I think this is involved. Nike will involve non-government organizations in its factory monitoring. Just out of curiosity, when Nike's factories in Vietnam run, carcinogen-like conditions that are 177 times legal allowed limits, how do you think they do that? Like, how do they get away with that? Frankly?
They bribe the governments.
Some sort of bribe to local government officials to overlook the worker conditions in the factories. That's almost certainly the way this is going down. Okay. And it's probably not like an official bribe. It's probably some sort of speaking fee or some sort of a proxy bribe that is made in order to get it done. Okay, Nike has also pledged to expand its worker education programs, its micro enterprise loan programs, and to fund university research. For this reason, I think at this point, because of all the things that Nike has done to clean up their act, I think at this point I would generally be comfortable wearing Nike footwear. I'm not sure about other apparel companies, but I think Nike has gotten a lot better. Nike Gives Back includes things like Special Olympics, after-school programs, school innovation funds. They've especially been criticized for their treatment of their abuse, really, of young women. So for this reason, they're trying to especially target that. So support for adolescent girls having an ability to end poverty for themselves in the world, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, questions about the Nike case? Or comments or reflections? Okay, I share the case here because it's, like I mentioned, just kind of an iconic case of a company that that has kind of been dinged over the years for worker abuse. Can you grab the lights, please, Chloe, again? And has, I think, rightly been pilloried in popular opinion for its poor treatment of its contract workers. Okay, let's look, though, at the Rundle article and talk a little bit about what we can do, both as consumers and also as business persons entering a world of business where supply chains are increasingly being outsourced ever more to developing world locations in a globalization style environment. Okay, and Rundle's got a few things to say about the stance that Christians should take in this context. What Christians should stand for, how they should behave to their counterparties, etc. Okay, and Rundle is actually positive on the things that Christian business persons can do, the influences that Christian business persons can have in the context of a global business community. So, for instance, he says here on page 204 in the second column at the top, specifically, Christian business people are doing what was once the exclusive purview of missionaries. That is, they are having a material, social, and even a spiritual impact on some of the poorest and most isolated places in the world. This essay will elaborate on how this is happening. Okay, and Rundle goes on to talk about how, actually, if it's done right, globalization can do good things for developing world workers and developing world countries. To the extent that a company trying to outsource its supply chain invests in a local community in Malaysia or Indonesia, building up the infrastructure, ensuring that there are good schools, ensuring that future generations in those locations will have better opportunities than their ancestors. To that extent, a company is doing well by Rundle's standards vis-a-vis their supply chain counterparties, the factory contract workers that they are employing. However, if a company goes into one of those locations and just kind of wants to extract from the community rather than give back, no local investment, no giving back to the community, the schools. When the factory, it's time to shut up the factory, they just leave it derelict, leave like a rundown building or something like that. Don't try to convert it into something the community can use. To the extent that a company does that, then they are basically being bad global business persons and are treating their counterparties poorly by Rundle's standards. Okay, but Rundle does say that if you look at the good that can be done by Western companies going into the developing world, it's actually pretty substantial. Okay, so on page 207, for instance, Rundle writes at the top, foreign investments by MNCs contribute to a country's social and economic well-being in many ways. One of the most obvious and immediate benefits is the inflow of capital, a scarce resource in many developing countries that is essential for economic growth. A little further down, MNCs also facilitate economic growth and social transformation by linking up with local suppliers for their inputs. Further down, another benefit can be seen in the local labor markets. Researchers are finding that with the notable exception of low-skill and low-margin industries such as toys, clothing, and sporting goods, linkages between MNC and local suppliers usually lead to improvements in the working conditions, pay, and training of local workers. Okay, so to the extent that a Western company treats those local workers with dignity and respect and gives back to the local community in the course of its business dealings with them, to that same extent, on Rundle's criterion at least, the Western company would be acting in a way that is consistent with Christian moral standards. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I want to get out of the Rundle article. Does anybody have any general comments so far on this overall discussion? Are you guys more or less in agreement with Rundle's views that there is a good way to approach globalization? You know, as a Christian business person, there's a bad way to do it, and you need to follow certain standards if you're going to, you know, deal with people in developing world countries and try to, you know, yes, take something from them, take their labor to get low margin supply chains, but also give back at the same time ways that support them. Okay. All right, I think there is general agreement in the room about the necessity of that. Let's move on to one other article. Actually, let's skip this Walensky article for now, and let's go to the Chandler article. We're still behind on our syllabus, so I'm going to just sort of move forward here. Okay, the Chandler article is on page 247. Okay, Chandler is offering guidance for consumers, especially American consumers, about what they can do in the context of globalization processes. And I want to direct our attention especially to this free and fair trade discussion. Okay, so maybe this will help bring it home for us real briefly if we do a quick exercise. Okay, turn to your neighbor and say, "Hi, neighbor." Okay, now help your neighbor out. Do this in a socially distanced way, but help your neighbor out by telling him or her where his or her shirt comes from. Look at the shirt tag behind the neck to see where the shirt comes from. You guys split up, find out where your shirt tags are from. Shout them out when you see where they come from. Where are our shirts coming from? China. India. York, where's your shirt come from? Oh, they don't say? Oh, is it like athletic wear? Okay, so it's just like, who knows? Ladies, shirts? Bangladesh. El Salvador? You know, there were actual workers on the other end of the supply chain who made these garments. They oversaw machines that made these garments. Okay, real people did. It's good to remember as consumers, even though we are removed from the workers who made these garments by incredible geographical distances and by incredible logistical distances. Who knows how many ships transported these goods to us before we used them? Who knows how many trucks carried them from one warehouse to another? Okay, there are distances. Still, at the end of the supply chain, there are real people. And we as consumers are participating in a system where we can either promote good at the end of the supply chain or promote bad. In other words, we can promote things like good worker treatment at the end of the supply chain in the developing world, or honestly, worker abuse in accordance with our consumer habits. Okay, now Chandler offers us some guidance here, and Chandler advocates something that he calls fair trade. This is on page 249. First column, fair trade refers to a specific form of pro-poor trade, paying above market prices and premiums where needed to ensure a respectable standard of living for producers. This includes a commitment to investing resources in capacity building, to ensuring good working conditions and rights for workers in fair trade producer groups, and to seeking long-term relationships between suppliers and fair trade companies in the North. Okay, so basically, Chandler advocates as the best practice for Western consumers. Chandler advocates purchasing fair trade goods. Okay, and fair trade goods are goods that are coming from companies that make it a policy to deal with suppliers in a manner that is dignified, respectful. Okay, and I think that that's a great idea of Chandler's. I think it's got some drawbacks. But I think in principle, the idea of avoiding companies that are notorious for abusing supplier workers and purchasing from companies that have a better reputation or even a particular explicit policy stance of treating supplier workers with dignity and respect. I think that that's a good way to go about this. I think one weakness of the fair trade idea, the fair trade notion that Chandler mentions, that is not mentioned in this article, I don't see it here, is that fair trade goods are often more expensive than other kinds of goods. And as consumers, we often have to make difficult choices about what we're going to purchase. And usually, I mean, quite frankly, I do this too. My priority is the lowest costs a lot of the time. And the lowest cost often comes from the company that's abusing its workers the most. And that's kind of, I mean, honestly, like, I don't have a lot of money. Like, I'm a professor at a small Christian college. I don't get paid a lot. And so I have like a bunch of dependents. I have to make decisions like this. So I think one weakness of Chandler's fair trade idea is that it can be expensive. I mean, college students don't have a lot of money. College students have big student debts that they've got to pay. You'll have these for years, by the way. I'm sorry. Unless Biden forgives it all. We'll see if he forgives all the student debt. At any rate. So if you can't pay above market prices for fair trade goods from companies that make an explicit policy of fair trade with their suppliers, what other options are there if you want to stand as a consumer, if you want to stand for good supply chain worker treatment? What other options do you have?
You can use some of your profits to, like the other article, use some of your profits to benefit the employees.
You guys speak up, girl. You're
mean,
talking
you
in a
can-
mask.
You can use some of your profits to benefit the employees.
Use some of your profits to benefit the employees. Okay. Now I'm speaking to us as consumers. So you would use some of your profits from your own job, right? Okay, is that what you're saying? Okay. So yes, you could certainly do that, and that's I think part of what fair trade is paying above market prices to companies that are selling goods a little bit more expensively than they potentially could, so as to better treat the supply chain workers. I think that's a great start for sure. I have a couple thoughts that come to mind real quickly, and I know I'm at time, so bear with me for just a minute. You could buy secondhand goods. Okay, that's a way to do, send a message cheaply. All my clothing actually comes from Goodwill. You're like, oh, now I understand Dr. Neal's wardrobe. But I do that because I cannot afford to buy fair trade products. Okay. At the same time, I also don't want to support worker abuse. So secondhand clothing, I think, is a great way to do that. There's some other options too that you could pursue. You could continue to buy from mainstream companies, not fair trade companies, but mainstream companies that have had worker treatment issues, but also at the same time just publicly stand for good worker treatment. Occasionally on social media posting about the importance of supply chain workers or good worker treatment or just talking about it is a good thing too. So there are some other options that you can pursue if you don't have the ability financially to buy just fair trade products. It's not as though you have to go dark if you can't do Chandler's option here.
I don't think there's any global company that's.
You don't think there's any what?
I don't think there's any global company that's like not abusing workers.
Any global company that's not abusing workers? I'll tell you what, it is really hard to be a company these days, a large company, and not abuse your supply chain workers. And that's because all the other companies are doing it. And they're selling lower cost products as a result. So it's very hard to avoid that, for sure. But some companies do. Some apparel manufacturers make it a point to stick with fair trade practices as they employ supply chain workers. So you can find such companies. But if you can't afford to pay the higher prices, there are other options like buying secondhand, or here's one other option: just wear your clothing longer, right? You don't have to always switch clothing out every couple
Make
weeks.
your own clothes, service.
Yeah, I saw